Absolutely everything you do for your health comes down to optimizing these 5 areas. When we talk about optimizing health, what exactly do we professionals mean? I'm Dr. Borja Bandera, a specialist in endocrinology and nutrition, and in today's video, I'm going to guide you step by step in building an elite metabolism. The promise is very clear. If you optimize these 5 factors, you'll make the most of your genetic potential for longevity, and at the same time, greatly improve your quality of life. Less pain, more energy, better mental clarity, fewer doctor visits. You're closer to that than you think if you hit the exact keys, the ones that will give you the most benefit for each unit of effort and time invested. First, let me ask you, do you know how heritable longevity is? What percentage of how long you'll live is determined by genetics? And to what extent is it determined by the environment? That's a good question, but it's pretty hard to answer. I'll tell you, so far, twin studies. As of today, genetics is responsible for what? Only about 20 or to answer as of today. Is it how long you'll live? Good question. Genetics, how long you'll live? I'll tell you, it's 25% it's genetics. Does it matter? Quite a bit. Or to answer, genetics. In fact, how long you'll live, that's a good responsibility. How long you'll live is one of those things where genetics plays a role. Raised in a constant environment, the same environment, they may not share the same life expectancy. However, this article in Science from January 2026, the Swedish adoption twin study of aging SATSA, concludes something quite different that changes everything a lot. Genetic inheritance, it says, contributes to more than 50% of the duration of intrinsic human life. What does this mean? Well, it means that a little more than half of your genetic potential for longevity is due to your genes and cannot be changed. What happens as extrinsic mortality decreases in the West due to medicine, fewer accidents, less violence, better sanitation, and more vaccines is that the influence of genes on longevity becomes more visible and noticeable. That is, the more we minimize and standardize environmental causes that used to kill us or shorten our life expectancy, the more genetic differences between people become apparent. So, with what we know today, we can say that about half or even a little more is genetic, and the other half is epigenetic. Now, that's not the question. The question is, what about the half that is controllable? Or rather, among the factors that are controllable, which ones are the most important? You already know that the so-called exposome is the set of factors in your environment that you are exposed to throughout your life, and that determine your health. Well, this exposome continuously interacts with your genes at an interface, a kind of playing field that we call metabolism. Do you remember the hallmarks of aging? I'll leave them here for you. Of the 12 hallmarks of aging, now updated to 14, at least 6 have a direct, causal, and bidirectional relationship with the individual's metabolic state. And they are mitochondrial dysfunction, altered or deregulated nutrient sensing, chronic inflammation, loss of proteostasis, deregulated macroautophagy, and dysbiosis. We can say that worsening your metabolism is the ultimate expression of a disease, accelerated aging. And surprise, our modern lifestyle is a weapon of mass destruction against your metabolism. Also, metabolism acts as an interface between genes and environments. As I said before, its efficiency determines how external stimuli impact cellular and systemic aging. For example, a resilient metabolism can buffer more negative external stimuli and make the body feel fewer external stimuli. And because of the metabolism of stimuli, all that negative exposure, that exposome, can accelerate your aging even more. Key message. If you want to age as slowly as your genetics allow, then optimize your metabolism. But of course, there's a lot of confusion. What exactly is metabolism? So far, you've learned that optimizing your metabolism means aging more slowly. Good. But what exactly is metabolism? Because what people generally understand by metabolism is what you burn, right? Energy expenditure. And it's much more complex. Metabolism is the totality of biochemical reactions that allow a living being to capture, transform, distribute, store, and use energy. For what purpose? Well, to maintain its structure, its function, repair functions, and adaptation functions to the environment. Well, to maintain its structure, its function, repair functions, and adaptation functions to the environment. Basically, metabolism is the huge machinery that manages energy. And we are energy. As you know, it has 2 important branches: catabolism, which is responsible for breaking down substrates like glucose or fatty acids to release energy that you will use for other things, and anabolism, which synthesizes biomolecules from simple substrates, like a protein from amino acids. Catabolism destroys, anabolism builds, but metabolism, and this is less well known, is also information. Metabolites, molecules that are generated by metabolic activity, regulate which genes are expressed, how stress is regulated, and cellular decision-making about proliferation, differentiation, and cell death, among many other things. So, what you've learned so far is that metabolism is the great biological system that translates the interaction between genes and environment into aging speed, functional capacity, and risk of disease. We need to act on metabolism because it is modifiable. Genetics, your genetics determine your potential. And metabolism, what percentage of that potential will you enjoy? That's why centenarians almost always have an impeccable metabolism, even at very advanced ages, with low levels of triglycerides, LDL, ApoB, and glucose. These people have a very high genetic potential, much better than most, which they have generally made very good use of as well. Although there will always be the centenarian who drinks and smokes, which only confirms what was explained at the beginning about the importance of genetics, which is very high. Pay attention, because out of the thousands of metabolic pathways that exist, there are some that are key in aging. First, there's the insulin and IGF-1 pathway, which, when downregulated, contributes to longevity. Now we'll talk about how to downregulate it. We have the mTORC1 pathway, which, with lower activity, also leads to greater longevity, at least in animals. We have the AMPK pathway, which acts as a sensor of low cellular energy, and its intermittent activation is beneficial. It is activated when ATP is used up, and AMP and AMPK are generated, and it works by activating repair and recycling mechanisms. The fourth pathway would be the sirtuin family. There are 7 NAD-dependent deacetylases that stimulate, let's say, your body's antioxidant defenses. And therefore they reduce oxidative stress. And then we would have the lipid load, especially one biomarker. Do you know which one it is? Yes, it's ApoB, which indicates the number of atherogenic particles you have in your body. The lower the ApoB, the greater the longevity. Now let's move to the practical part of today's video. Let's see which 5 very specific things you, as an individual, should optimize to maximize your metabolism in the shortest possible time. The first one is insulin sensitivity. If there is a common metabolic denominator of diseases associated with aging, it's insulin resistance. And people think of insulin resistance as a glucose problem, which it is. But it's not just that, it's something much bigger. Insulin resistance is a sign of poor fuel management throughout your entire body. Insulin resistance implies a pathological distribution of energy. Let's say that energy arrives in excess where it shouldn't go and doesn't reach where it should go. Do you know that it's a risk factor for different types of cancer, that it accelerates the development of atherosclerotic plaque in the arteries, or that it generates enormous amounts of oxidative stress that your body can't buffer? In fact, if we think about it, hey, do we have a model of accelerated metabolic aging that we've been studying for more than 100 years, maybe even longer? Yes, diabetes mellitus. Diabetes is a model of accelerated aging that we know very well. Look, in the KIHD cohort, the Finnish one, where we've studied the topic of saunas before, men with diabetes and also a low VO2 max, we'll talk about this now, had 4.2 times higher risk of cardiovascular death. Of the metabolic axis mentioned earlier, the insulin and IGF-1 axis is disrupted when insulin sensitivity is poor. Its chronic hyperactivation, as happens in diabetes and other conditions, inhibits repair processes because it suppresses a very important family of longevity genes, which are the FOXO genes. Remember their name. In the hallmarks of aging, this is what was called deregulation of nutrient sensing. Therefore, when this pathway is highly activated, repair doesn't happen properly. And what is aging? The accumulation of unrepaired cellular damage that builds up over time. Always remember the following: mitochondrial dysfunction, insulin resistance, and chronic inflammation are the biological basis of accelerated aging. In all diseases associated with aging, you will hear these 3 elements whenever you read an article. And that's why, if you want to improve your insulin sensitivity, here is this recent video where I explain step by step how to do it. Second element to improve, cardiorespiratory capacity, or we can say VO2 max. Look, I'm telling you honestly, with complete sincerity, if I had to choose just one health metric in a person, it would be this one. It reflects the body's ability to take in oxygen through the lungs, transport it via the cardiovascular system, and use it in the mitochondria. So ultimately, what does VO2 max measure? Well, it measures many things, but above all, mitochondrial function. Having a high VO2 max means having a large volume of healthy, functional mitochondria. And this is a game changer for longevity. In fact, its correlation with mortality is the strongest and most consistent among the markers we know. Cardiorespiratory fitness predicts mortality better than smoking, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, or even type 2 diabetes. Increasing VO2 max by just 3.5 milliliters per kilogram per minute. Well, I say just, but this is actually quite difficult. It is associated with a reduction in mortality between 13 and 15% regardless of age, BMI, sex, or any diseases you may have. Look at this. Individuals with normal weight but low physical fitness, without any diseases and apparently healthy, had twice the risk of dying from any cause compared to people with normal weight and high physical fitness. Meanwhile, look at this observation as well. Individuals with obesity but high physical fitness had no differences in mortality compared to those with normal weight. Pay attention. This finding is called fat but fit in English. It strengthens the narrative that weight alone is not a good indicator of health, but physical fitness is. And physical fitness is not about how you look, it's not about how you look, but about what your body can do. Why does VO2 max decrease? Well, look, it's because there's mitochondrial deterioration over time if we don't do anything to prevent it. Aged mitochondria produce more oxidative stress, accumulate mutations in mitochondrial DNA. These mutations cause even more oxidative stress, and this activates inflammatory pathways that make you age. How do we take care of mitochondrial health? How? Tell me. By giving them more capacity through exercise and reducing their workload with proper nutrition. You can learn how we take care of mitochondrial health. Now, I want to remind you that the third edition of Chronos, our master's program in scientific longevity, is already available. If you are a health professional, doctor, nurse, physical therapist, it doesn't matter, trainer, nutritionist. If you are dedicated to improving people's health and want to train in scientific longevity with the best teachers, researchers, and clinicians, I recommend you take a look. I'll leave all the information here for you. The third point to improve is muscle strength. If VO2 max is the first pillar, the most important one in my opinion, strength is the second when it comes to longevity. Your physical function is the material expression of your metabolism. Remember this phrase. Or put another way, one of the best ways to evaluate your nervous and metabolic system is through force production. Strength is one of the best things your metabolism can do. What is the relationship between muscle and metabolism? Well, everything, absolutely everything. Skeletal muscle is the main tissue that absorbs glucose and acts as a metabolic regulator through the secretion of myokines, which achieves a high maximum muscle strength. Therefore, it greatly delays the point at which an individual goes from being able to unable, that is, it postpones the onset of dependency. And the second point is to recover from episodes of poor health throughout life. This point is greatly underestimated. And of course, high cardiorespiratory capacity and high muscular strength offer a synergistic protective effect which far exceeds each variable on its own. In this sense, the pinnacle of metabolic health is the hybrid athlete, not the marathon runner or the weightlifter. Although generally you have to dedicate more time to cardio than to strength. Fourth point, second to last, visceral adiposity and liver health. The topography of fat, where it is located in your body, is more important than weight or even total body fat percentage. Fat, especially visceral fat, is an endocrine and immune tissue that, when present in excess, secretes pro-inflammatory substances like TNF-alpha, interleukin-6 resistant, do those sound familiar, and inhibits other beneficial ones like adiponectin. Well, this activates several hallmarks of aging that we've seen before. So, we're not wrong if we say that visceral adiposity is an endocrine organ that accelerates aging. That's why I made this video to show you how to eliminate it quickly. Another manifestation of visceral fat is its pathological accumulation in the liver, which is fat in an organ, in a viscus, which is the liver. This organ is the central axis of your metabolism, acting as a bridge between adiposity, insulin resistance, inflammation, and immunosenescence. If you want, take a look at the channel. Type hepatic fat or fatty liver solutions in the search bar and you'll find many videos we've made over the years to help improve it. A question I often get is, Borja, what is the optimal body composition according to age ranges? Well, look, there isn't really an optimal one. It depends on what it's optimal for. But what we do know is that from about 20 to 22% body fat in men and from about 33 to 35% in women, the rate of visceral fat accumulation becomes much steeper. And that's when things like dyslipidemia, insulin resistance, and metabolic problems start to appear. So at the very least, you should try not to reach that body fat percentage, all right? And the fifth point is chronic systemic inflammation. We can't talk about longevity, functional capacity, or health without talking about chronic inflammation. Old age, or poor aging, is marked by sterile systemic inflammation without microorganisms that affects the entire body, not just one area. It's caused by an immune system that no longer works properly. This inflammation is the systemic consequence of a metabolic dysfunction that persists over time and originates from a damaged metabolism. That's why we talk about immunometabolism, because metabolism and the immune system are two sides of the same coin. In this context, more and more zombie cells or senescent cells appear. Why are they called zombies? Because they generate a kind of metabolic poison called the SASP phenotype, which induces senescence in neighboring cells. It's like when a zombie bites another and turns them into one. And above all, the chronic activation of inflammatory pathways, which exhaust your cell's repair and recycling mechanisms. Finally, this leads to the usual, mitochondrial damage. And when the cell's engine breaks down, there's cellular damage. When there's cellular damage, there's a loss of function in the organ or system we're talking about. And when this happens, there's aging. How do you measure chronic inflammation? The most sensitive and specific parameter is high-sensitivity C-reactive protein. When it's below 1 milligram per liter, inflammation is low. Although if we want optimal ranges, it should actually be below 0.1. Between 1 and 2, the cardiovascular risk is intermediate to low. Between 2 and 3, it's moderate, and above 3, be careful, there's already considerable inflammation with a higher risk. What messages should you take home from this video? Genetics strongly affects the likelihood of living a long life. And also, even more so, the further we go to the extremes. However, the speed at which we age is not predetermined. What is the adjustable dial for that speed? Metabolism. It is measurable, it is modifiable, you can act on it. Strength is a vital sign of longevity and the clearest expression of your healthy metabolism. Healthy muscle is a metabolic buffer, a shock absorber. Losing muscle is the same as losing metabolism. And now I'll leave you to your work. Start working on improving these 5 important areas. Let me know in the comments what you thought of the video. I'll see you in the next one. A big hug and keep empowering yourself.